In the world where everyone is talking, posting, sharing, broadcasting their thoughts and lives in endless streams of content, silence has become rare. And because it's rare, it's become conspicuous. When someone is consistently silent on social media, when their profile remains empty or dormant while everyone around them is actively engaged, that silence doesn't go unnoticed. People wonder, what does it mean? Is it judgment? Is it superiority? Is it fear? Is it indifference? The silence itself becomes a statement, a presence through absence, a choice that communicates something even in its refusal to communicate. So, what does your silence on social media actually reveal about you? What message are you sending, intentionally or not, by choosing not to participate? And what can Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who understood that what we don't say is often as revealing as what we do, teach us about the psychological significance of silence in an age of constant noise? To understand this, we need to start with Jung's fundamental insight about opposites and their relationship. Jung believed that psychological truth often exists in paradox, in the tension between opposites, and silence versus speech is one of the most fundamental oppositions in human experience. Most people assume that speech reveals, while silence conceals, that talking shows who you are while being quiet hides it. But Jung understood something more subtle. Silence reveals just as much as speech, only differently. It reveals through what it doesn't say, through the space it creates, through the choice it represents. When you're silent on social media, you're not hiding yourself. You're revealing yourself through a different channel. Your silence communicates values, priorities, boundaries, and psychological orientation just as clearly as others' constant posting communicates theirs. The question isn't whether your silence reveals something. It's what exactly it reveals, and whether you're conscious of what you're communicating through your choice not to speak. Let's consider what Jung called individuation and what silence reveals about this process. Individuation is the journey of becoming your authentic self rather than conforming to collective expectations. And in contemporary culture, the collective expectation is clear. Participate, share, be visible, prove your existence through constant digital presence. When you choose silence instead, when you refuse to participate in this collective behavior, you're revealing that you're engaged in differentiation from the collective. Your silence says, I'm not going to do what everyone else is doing just because everyone else is doing it. I'm going to make choices based on my own values and needs, not collective pressure. This reveals psychological independence, the capacity to resist collective currents and choose your own path. People who are silent on social media are often revealing, through that silence, that they've achieved or are working toward genuine individuation. They're not letting the collective determine their behavior. They're listening to their own inner authority instead. There's also something profound being revealed about what Jung called the introvert's orientation toward reality. Jung defined introversion as an orientation of psychic energy toward the inner subjective world rather than the outer objective world. For introverts, the internal landscape of thoughts, feelings, and reflections is primary. External reality is processed through internal filters. When an introvert is silent on social media, they're revealing this fundamental orientation. Their silence says, my real life happens internally, in dimensions that can't be adequately shared or represented through posts and images. The outer world of social media isn't where my authentic existence takes place. I exist primarily in interior spaces that don't need or want external documentation. This silence reveals psychological type, a deep introverted nature that finds meaning in subjective internal experience rather than objective external display. Jung would recognize this silence not as absence, but as presence in the appropriate dimension, the inner world where introverts actually live. Let's also consider what silence reveals about relationship to attention and validation. Jung understood that humans have varying needs for external validation and attention. Some people, often extroverts, need external feedback to feel real, to process their experiences, to confirm their existence. But others have developed internal sources of validation that don't depend on external attention. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you've found or are cultivating these internal sources. Your silence says, I don't need external validation to confirm my worth. I don't need attention to feel real. I don't need others to witness my life for it to be meaningful. This reveals psychological maturity and self-sufficiency, the capacity to validate yourself internally rather than seeking constant external confirmation. People who are silent on social media are often revealing, through that silence, that they've achieved a level of independence from external validation that allows them to exist fully without an audience. There's also something being revealed about boundaries and the capacity to maintain them. Jung believed that psychological health requires clear boundaries between self and other, between private and public, between what you share and what you keep. In the age of social media, maintaining these boundaries has become increasingly difficult. The pressure to share, to be transparent, to make everything visible is intense. When you remain silent, when you refuse to share despite this pressure, you're revealing that you have strong boundaries and the psychological strength to maintain them against collective pressure. Your silence says, I know where my boundaries are, and I'm not going to violate them just to fit in. I can tolerate being different, being unknown, being mysterious, because my boundaries matter more than social acceptance. This reveals psychological integrity and the kind of boundary strength that Jung considered essential for healthy personality development. Jung also spoke about what he called the shadow and its relationship to public performance. The shadow contains everything we don't want to acknowledge about ourselves. Social media encourages shadow denial, presenting only positive qualities while hiding everything negative or complicated. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing a different relationship with your shadow. Your silence might say, I'm not willing to present a false, all-positive version of myself, so I'm choosing not to present anything at all. I'd rather be honestly absent than dishonestly present. Or your silence might say, I'm working with my shadow privately, integrating it in ways that can't happen while performing for an audience. Either way, your silence reveals shadow consciousness, awareness that you're complex and contradictory, in ways that social media can't accommodate. People who are silent on social media often have more integrated relationships with their shadow precisely because they're not spending energy maintaining false public personas. There's also something significant being revealed about relationship to time and presence. Jung understood that genuine presence requires being fully in the moment, engaged with actual reality rather than representation of reality. When you're silent on social media, when you're not documenting and sharing your experiences, you're revealing a commitment to direct presence over mediated representation. Your silence says, I'm living my life, not recording it. I'm present with my experiences, not thinking about how to capture them for others. I value actual experience more than the social currency of documented experience. This reveals priorities and values, a choice to prioritize depth of engagement over breadth of display. People who are silent on social media are often revealing, through that silence, that they've chosen to be fully alive in their actual lives, rather than partially alive in both actual and digital dimensions. Let's also consider what silence reveals about relationship to the collective unconscious and archetypal patterns. Jung believed that certain archetypal patterns repeat throughout human history, and one of the most powerful is the archetype of the hermit or the sage, the wise figure who withdraws from society to pursue deeper truths. When you're silent on social media, you might be embodying this archetypal pattern, consciously or unconsciously. Your silence says, I've withdrawn from the collective noise to pursue something deeper. I'm not interested in the surface-level exchanges that dominate public discourse. I'm oriented toward wisdom, depth, understanding that requires solitude and silence. This reveals archetypal identification, alignment with patterns of meaning that transcend individual personality. People who are silent on social media are often revealing, through that silence, that they're living according to archetypal patterns that value depth over display, wisdom over performance, solitude over constant connection. There's also something profound being revealed about relationship to authenticity and performance. Jung distinguished between the persona, the social mask we wear, and the authentic self beneath it. Social media is fundamentally about persona construction, creating and maintaining a public image. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you're not interested in this performance. Your silence says, I'm not going to construct and maintain a persona for public consumption. I'd rather be authentically unknown than inauthentically visible. I value genuine self-expression over carefully curated image management. This reveals commitment to authenticity and resistance to the performative demands of contemporary culture. People who are silent on social media often have deeper integrity around authenticity, precisely because they are not spending energy performing a version of themselves for others. Jung also understood something about what he called psychic energy and its conservation. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing how you've chosen to allocate your finite psychic energy. Your silence says, I've determined that social media participation would drain more energy than it would provide. I'm investing my energy elsewhere, in work, relationships, creative pursuits, internal development, things that genuinely nourish me, rather than deplete me. This reveals self-knowledge and strategic resource management. People who are silent on social media have often done the psychological math and concluded that their energy is better spent elsewhere. Their silence reveals wisdom about energy economics and the courage to allocate resources according to personal truth rather than social expectation. There's also something being revealed about relationship to mystery and the unknown. Jung was fascinated by mystery, by aspects of human experience that resist explanation and categorization. When you're silent on social media, when you remain unknown to most people, you're preserving mystery. Your silence says, I don't need to be fully known. I'm comfortable with being mysterious, with letting people wonder, with not explaining myself. I understand that mystery has value, that not everything should be revealed. This reveals comfort with ambiguity and the kind of psychological sophistication that understands the power of what's left unsaid. People who are silent on social media often have richer inner lives precisely because they've protected the mysterious, unexplained dimensions of their existence from the flattening effect of constant explanation and display. Let's also consider what silence reveals about relationship to judgment and criticism. Jung understood that exposing yourself to others inevitably means exposing yourself to judgment, and that some people are more sensitive to this judgment than others. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing something about your relationship to potential criticism. Your silence might say, I'm protecting myself from judgment that would be harmful to me. I'm aware of my sensitivities, and I'm honoring them by not exposing myself to environments where I'd be criticized or misunderstood. This reveals self-protective wisdom and appropriate boundary maintenance. Or your silence might say, I don't care enough about others' opinions to subject myself to their judgment. I'm psychologically independent enough that I don't need to prove myself or defend myself to the collective. Either way, your silence reveals a considered relationship with judgment rather than unconscious reactivity to it. There's also something significant being revealed about relationship to comparison and envy. Jung understood that humans naturally compare themselves to others, and that this comparison often generates painful emotions like envy and inadequacy. Social media intensifies these dynamics dramatically. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you've recognized this dynamic and chosen not to participate. Your silence says, I'm not going to engage in the comparison game. I'm not going to measure myself against others' curated presentations. I'm not going to generate envy in others or feel envious myself by participating in this competitive display. This reveals psychological awareness and the emotional intelligence to recognize which environments are healthy for you and which aren't. People who are silent on social media have often protected their mental health by removing themselves from comparison dynamics that were causing suffering. Jung also spoke about what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to generate new possibilities by holding tension between opposites. Your silence on social media, when everyone else is speaking, creates this kind of tension. Your silence says, I'm holding the opposite position to the collective. I'm maintaining the pole of quiet in a noisy culture, of privacy in a transparent world, of restraint in an exhibitionist age. This reveals a compensatory function, providing balance to collective one-sidedness. People who are silent on social media are often unconsciously serving this compensatory role, not just for themselves, but for the culture, demonstrating that another way is possible, that you don't have to participate, that silence is a valid choice. There's also something profound being revealed about relationship to control and spontaneity. Jung understood that life contains both elements we can control and elements we must surrender to. Social media offers illusory control over your image and narrative. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you've relinquished this control. Your silence says, I'm comfortable with not controlling how I'm perceived. I don't need to manage my narrative. I can let people think what they will without trying to shape their perceptions. This reveals psychological flexibility and trust in life that allows you to exist without constant image management. People who are silent on social media often have less anxiety precisely because they've given up the exhausting work of controlling others' perceptions. Let's also consider what silence reveals about relationship to meaning and purpose. Jung believed that genuine meaning comes from within, from connection with what he called the self, not from external recognition or social validation. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that your sense of meaning and purpose isn't dependent on being seen or recognized publicly. Your silence says, my life has meaning that doesn't require an audience. My purpose isn't diminished by being unknown to most people. I'm oriented toward internal sources of significance rather than external validation of importance. This reveals psychological depth and the kind of mature spirituality that Jung considered the ultimate achievement of psychological development. People who are silent on social media have often found genuine meaning that doesn't require witnesses, that sustains them regardless of visibility or recognition. There's also something being revealed about relationship to intimacy and connection. Jung understood that genuine intimacy requires vulnerability, but also discrimination about with whom you're vulnerable. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing how you've chosen to create intimacy. Your silence says, I'm not going to be vulnerable indiscriminately to everyone. I'm going to reserve my genuine self for relationships that have earned that trust. I value depth of connection with a few over shallow connection with many. This reveals relational wisdom and the kind of discernment that protects intimacy by not squandering it on the masses. People who are silent on social media often have richer intimate relationships precisely because they haven't dispersed their vulnerability across hundreds of superficial connections. Jung also spoke about what he called the relationship between the ego and the self, and what silence reveals about this relationship. The ego is your conscious sense of identity, often concerned with recognition, achievement, and social position. The self is your deeper center, concerned with wholeness, meaning, and authentic being. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing which center is dominant in your life. Your silence says, "I'm oriented toward the self rather than the ego. I'm not interested in ego gratification through likes and followers. I'm pursuing something deeper, the wholeness and integration that the self seeks." This reveals psychological maturity and what Jung would call the wisdom of the second half of life, when concern shifts from ego achievement to self-realization. People who are silent on social media have often made this crucial shift from ego to self-orientation. There's also something significant being revealed about relationship to technology and its effects. Jung lived before the digital age, but he understood the importance of consciousness about what influences you and how. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you've become conscious of technology's effects and chosen to limit your exposure. Your silence says, "I've recognized that social media affects me in ways I don't like. I've noticed it makes me anxious, envious, distracted, or disconnected from what matters. I've chosen to protect myself by opting out." This reveals self-awareness and the capacity to make difficult choices that go against cultural norms when those norms conflict with your well-being. People who are silent on social media often have greater mental health precisely because they've removed themselves from environments that were harming them. Let's also consider what silence reveals about relationship to legacy and how you want to be remembered. Jung spoke often about death and the importance of living in ways that create meaningful legacy. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing what you consider lasting and significant. Your silence says, "I don't believe that social media presence constitutes meaningful legacy. I'm investing in things that will outlast me in more substantial ways. Relationships, work, ideas, contributions that don't depend on digital documentation." This reveals long-term thinking and values that transcend the immediate, ephemeral nature of social media. People who are silent on social media are often building legacy in dimensions that won't be measured in posts or followers, but in actual impact on others and the world. There's also something profound being revealed about relationship to suffering and its meaning. Jung believed that suffering is inevitable and potentially transformative, but that this transformation requires privacy and depth. When you're silent on social media during difficult times, you're revealing how you've chosen to work with suffering. Your silence says, "I'm not going to perform my pain for others. I'm not going to turn my suffering into content. I'm going to work with it privately, letting it transform me in ways that can only happen away from public view." This reveals respect for suffering's sacred nature and understanding that genuine transformation isn't a spectator sport. People who are silent on social media often emerge from difficulties with deeper wisdom, precisely because they've honored suffering's need for privacy. Jung also understood something about what he called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that suggest deeper patterns of connection between inner and outer reality. When you're silent on social media, you're creating conditions where synchronicity can occur more readily. Your silence says, "I'm not filling my consciousness with digital noise. I'm leaving space for subtle connections, meaningful patterns, and unexpected encounters that require attention and openness to notice." This reveals receptivity to dimensions of reality that constant digital engagement obscures. People who are silent on social media often report richer experiences of synchronicity precisely because they've maintained the quiet attention necessary to recognize meaningful patterns. There's also something being revealed about relationship to the body and embodied experience. Jung understood that humans are embodied beings, that we exist physically in space and time. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing your commitment to embodied presence. Your silence says, I'm prioritizing being in my body, in physical space, in actual relationships with actual people, in actual places. I'm not going to substitute digital representation for embodied presence. This reveals grounding and commitment to the physical dimension of existence that digital life threatens to replace. People who are silent on social media often have richer embodied experiences precisely because they're fully present in their bodies rather than partially present while managing digital presence. Let's also consider what silence reveals about relationship to creativity and how it emerges. Jung believed that genuine creativity emerges from the unconscious and requires specific conditions to develop. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you're protecting creative process. Your silence says, I'm not going to dissipate my creative energy by performing creativity. I'm going to protect the vulnerable, uncertain, messy process of genuine creation by keeping it private until it's ready to emerge. This reveals understanding of how creativity actually works and respect for process over product. People who are silent on social media often produce more substantial creative work, precisely because they've protected the creative process from the distorting effects of constant display and feedback. Jung also spoke about what he called the conjunctio, the union of opposites that creates wholeness. Your silence on social media represents one pole of an important opposition: silence versus speech, privacy versus publicity, being versus appearing. When you maintain your silence, you're revealing that you're holding this pole consciously. Your silence says, I'm not going to collapse these opposites by making everything public. I'm going to maintain the tension between public and private, between what's shown and what's hidden, because this tension is necessary for wholeness. This reveals psychological sophistication, an understanding that wholeness requires both poles, not just one. People who are silent on social media often have more integrated personalities, precisely because they've maintained the private dimension that balances whatever public presence they have elsewhere. There's also something significant being revealed about relationship to power and influence. Jung understood that there are different kinds of power, the obvious power of visibility and reach, but also the subtle power of depth, authenticity, and genuine presence. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you're not pursuing power through visibility. Your silence says, I'm not interested in influence through follower counts or viral reach. If I have impact, it will be through depth of engagement, quality of work, or authenticity of presence, not through digital metrics. This reveals values about what kind of power and influence actually matter. People who are silent on social media often have more genuine influence in their actual spheres of life, precisely because they've invested in depth rather than breadth. Let's also consider what silence reveals about relationship to the collective shadow. Jung spoke about the shadow not just as individual, but as collective, the darkness that whole societies don't want to acknowledge. Social media often functions as a kind of collective shadow theater, where unacknowledged cultural material gets acted out unconsciously. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you've recognized this dynamic and chosen not to participate. Your silence says, I'm not going to unconsciously act out collective shadow material. I'm not going to participate in the outrage cycles, the virtue signaling, the tribal warfare that represents unintegrated collective shadow. This reveals consciousness about collective dynamics and the courage to stay separate from unconscious collective processes. There's also something profound being revealed about relationship to mortality and how you want to spend your finite time. Jung emphasized the importance of confronting mortality and letting that awareness shape how you live. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing what you've concluded about how to spend your limited time. Your silence says, I've looked at my finite life and decided that social media participation isn't worth the time it requires. I'd rather spend my precious days doing things that feel genuinely meaningful to me. This reveals existential clarity and the courage to live according to what actually matters to you rather than what culture says should matter. People who are silent on social media often have richer, more meaningful lives precisely because they've been ruthlessly honest about how they want to spend their time. Jung also understood something about what he called the objective psyche, the reality of inner experience that exists independent of external validation. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you have a developed relationship with this objective inner reality. Your silence says, my inner life is substantial and real in itself. I don't need to externalize it to make it valid. My thoughts, feelings, and experiences have their own reality that doesn't depend on being shared or witnessed. This reveals psychological depth and the kind of inner richness that Jung considered essential for genuine individuation. People who are silent on social media often have more developed inner lives precisely because they've invested in cultivating internal reality rather than external display. There's also something being revealed about relationship to freedom and autonomy. Jung believed that genuine freedom comes from internal authority rather than conformity to external demands. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you've achieved a degree of this freedom. Your silence says, I'm free to choose not to participate. I don't feel compelled by social pressure or fear of missing out. I'm autonomous enough to make choices based on my own assessment of what serves me. This reveals psychological freedom and the kind of internal authority that Jung considered the mark of mature personality. People who are silent on social media often experience greater freedom precisely because they've broken free from the tyranny of collective expectations. Let's also consider what silence reveals about relationship to contemplation and reflection. Jung valued contemplation, the practice of deep reflection that requires quiet and solitude. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you've prioritized contemplative practice. Your silence says, I'm using my mental space for reflection rather than reaction. I'm cultivating depth of thought rather than breadth of opinion. I'm choosing contemplation over commentary. This reveals intellectual seriousness and commitment to genuine understanding rather than superficial engagement. People who are silent on social media often have deeper understanding precisely because they've protected the mental space necessary for genuine contemplation. There's also something significant being revealed about relationship to change and transformation. Jung believed that genuine transformation happens slowly, in darkness, away from observation. When you're silent on social media, especially during periods of change, you're revealing that you're protecting transformative process. Your silence says, I'm in a period of transition or transformation that needs privacy to unfold properly. I'm not going to document this process because documentation would interfere with it. I trust that transformation will become visible when it's complete. This reveals respect for the organic timing of psychological development. People who are silent on social media during transitions often emerge more genuinely transformed precisely because they've honored the process rather than performing it. Finally, there's something profound being revealed about relationship to your own depths and the commitment to exploring them. Jung spent his life exploring the unconscious, and he understood that this exploration requires turning away from external distractions. When you're silent on social media, you're revealing that you're engaged in this inward journey. Your silence says, I'm oriented toward my own depths. I'm exploring my unconscious, my dreams, my inner symbols and patterns. I'm committed to the work of becoming conscious in ways that require privacy and focused attention. This reveals the kind of psychological seriousness that Jung devoted his life to, the commitment to know yourself at the deepest levels. In the end, your silence on social media reveals far more than absence or emptiness. It reveals values, priorities, psychological orientation, level of consciousness, relationship to yourself and others, and choices about how to spend your finite life and energy. Carl Jung would see silence not as lack, but as presence in a different dimension, not as hiding, but as revealing through a different language. Your silence speaks volumes about psychological maturity, independence from collective pressure, commitment to authenticity, protection of inner life, discernment about boundaries, and ultimately the courage to live according to your own truth, rather than conforming to cultural expectations about visibility and participation. The question isn't whether your silence reveals something about you. It absolutely does. The question is whether you're conscious of what your silence reveals, and whether what it reveals aligns with who you actually are and want to be. Jung would encourage examining your silence. Is it conscious choice or unconscious avoidance? Does it serve your growth or prevent it? Does it honor your authentic nature or betray it? Your silence, like all behavior, is meaningful. And understanding what it means, what it reveals, what it's protecting or expressing, is part of the essential work of becoming conscious, becoming whole, becoming fully yourself.